So perhaps God did not place dogs beside human beings to teach obedience or responsibility, but to set beside us a living reminder of what love looks like before conditions ever enter the picture. Not an idea, not a rule, but a presence. In this sense, the dog becomes a kind of spiritual anchor. Seen from a deeper angle, dogs prevent human beings from floating too far away into the world of their own ideas. We are remarkably good at living inside concepts, inside explanations, conclusions, and stories about ourselves, while forgetting the simple fact of being here. Now, many spiritual traditions speak of awakening in very modest language, not as a flash of light, but as presence, as a willingness to stop arguing with what is already taking place, as a gentle trust in this moment, exactly as it appears. And this, of course, is where the dog has always been. A dog does not rehearse grievances. It does not construct a memory palace of wounds. It returns almost immediately, even after pain. Not because it is unaware, but because it does not live by calculation. The dog does not punish absence. It does not withdraw affection as a lesson. It does not interpret vulnerability as failure. This is often mistaken for foolishness. But it is not ignorance. It is not naive. It is a certain clarity of heart, a way of meeting life without armor and without delay. Human beings often notice this and say, half-jokingly, dogs are better than people. But the deeper truth is more unsettling than that. Dogs are not better than humans. They are what humans look like when fear has not yet learned how to take control of the heart. And this is why losing a dog hurts as deeply as it does. The grief often feels out of proportion, almost embarrassing in its intensity. But that's only because the bond itself was never built out of words. You didn't love your dog through ideas. You loved through rhythm, through routine, through presence, through the sound of familiar footsteps, through touch, through shared silence that didn't need to explain itself. So when a dog leaves, you don't lose a story. You don't lose a role or a narrative. You lose a way of being. It is as if innocence itself has slipped away, leaving behind the absence of something that once required no explanation to feel safe. This is why people often say, "He knew me better than anyone." And what they mean is not that the dog understood their opinions or their history or the character they present to the world. A dog never knew your persona. It knew your tone, your breath, the subtle shifts in your body when you were anxious or at ease. A dog knows when you are unsafe with yourself, and it stays. So the grief is not only for the animal that is gone, but for the self that once knew how to settle, without defense or justification, in the simple presence of another living being. That is what is being mourned. Not companionship alone, but unconditional safety, experienced without words. Eventually you notice something that doesn't quite sit right. Why does a creature like this pass through life so quickly? Why does life allow something so transparent to remain only for a while? But perhaps this is not an accident. Dogs do not break our hearts by mistake. They break them by design. If love never ended, we would treat it casually. We would confuse it with ownership. We would assume it belonged to us. But because it ends, love is revealed as something else entirely. Not a possession, but a participation. Not something we keep, but something we enter for a time. A dog's brief life quietly teaches what no philosophy lecture ever quite manages to say. That presence matters more than duration. That depth is not measured in years. That grief is not a failure of love, but its price. We often imagine grief as the opposite of love. But in truth, grief is love that has nowhere to go. In this sense, dogs are not meant to stay forever. They are temporary teachers, not permanent companions. They arrive. They give themselves completely. They complete the lesson, and then they leave, returning us to the question we would rather avoid: can we love fully, knowing in advance that it will end? A dog answers that question not with words, but by living it briefly, beautifully, and without regret. There is another way of looking at this whole business, and it isn't a particularly comfortable one. You see, a dog doesn't really belong to you, even though the language insists that it does. My dog, we say, as though life itself were something that could be owned. But if you watch carefully, the relationship doesn't behave like ownership at all. It behaves more like a temporary arrangement. For a short while, two lives run alongside one another. They share mornings, habits, silences, and in that time something subtle happens. The dog has a curious effect on you, not because it tries to improve you, but because it doesn't. It draws you out of abstraction and back into immediacy. It interrupts your seriousness. It softens the edges that living tends to harden. And then, just as you begin to assume this will go on indefinitely, it stops, and we call this a tragedy. But from another point of view, it was never meant to be otherwise. The arrangement was always temporary. The mistake is thinking the purpose was permanence. It wasn't. Humans often imagine they are rescuing dogs, saving them, giving them a better life. But one could just as easily say that dogs appear at precisely the moments when humans are in danger of becoming a little too calculating, a little too mechanical, a little too certain, and when that danger has passed, the dog goes on its way, quite naturally. And perhaps what matters most isn't the dog at all, but what its presence keeps pointing toward. When your dog looks at you, tail moving, eyes open, completely unguarded, there is no calculation there, no request, no plan. It is not asking, will you protect me, or will you stay? It is asking something far more difficult than that. Can you live like this too?